Hello, and welcome to the Wild Wonder podcast, where we seek to democratize and demystify holistic wellness practices. I am your host, Kristen Yorka, and today we have a show entitled The World's Gone Gaga over Gaga. To speak with us on what exactly Gaga is dancer, dance scholar, and Gaga guide Deborah Friedes Galili. Welcome.
Hi, it's wonderful to be with you here. Thank you for hosting me.
I'm so happy to have you. Last we spoke, you were getting prepared to teach your first class post-pandemic. How did it go?
Oh, it was such a gift to get back in the studio after all this time. Even though I've been doing Gaga online, great to be back with people in a real space.
Did it feel like you had to relearn social norms?
A little bit. I think
That's kind of my fear.
We all had to exhale and realize that it's okay. You know, we're lucky to be vaccinated here. Mm-hmm. So, you know, but we realized it's time to move. It's time to enjoy and to reconnect.
That's awesome. So for those that don't know, how do we describe Gaga for the uninitiated?
Oh, it's a great question. It's something that after all these years, sometimes I still grapple with. So I guess maybe to give a little bit of background, I always say it's Ohad Naharin's movement language. This is something that's been developed by Ohad Naharin, who's the house choreographer for Batsheva Dance Company, Israel's biggest, most prestigious dance company. And he was the artistic director for many years. So it's a movement language, but sort of bottom line is that it's a movement practice. It's classes that are given, and there's both classes for dancers and also classes for anybody. If you have a body, you can do Gaga, and it's a way of really working out. First and foremost, it's a fundamentally physical practice where we're moving the whole time, where we're connecting to our stamina, to our speed, to our agility, our flexibility. And at the same time as we're connecting to this sense of workout and challenging our physical limits, it's also a way to really enjoy moving and connect to our passion to move, connect to the pleasure that's inside movement, to find our own groove, our own internal rhythm. And so it really touches on both this physical aspect, but also something beyond that.
Yeah, what I found when I took the class with myself, my daughter, and my husband, and I mean, I could say so much about it, but what was different from any other movement practice, primarily yoga, was the teacher kept telling us, keep your eyes open, because part of it is to also, you know, be able to engage or take in, I'm assuming, the world around you and the people you're dancing with and near.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. And it's true. We move through life with our eyes open, and it is nice once in a while to take that moment, as in yoga, as in many practices, to close our eyes, and sometimes that can heighten our ability to sense our body. But we'd like to also find that when our eyes are open, when we're just walking through the street. And for sure in Gaga class, we want to find that with our eyes open the whole time, to also see. It's really important for us in classes to see what the teacher is doing. The teacher is moving the whole time with all the participants. And so we can learn a lot from what the teacher is doing, and we can learn from each other, from what other people are doing in the space. But then we can take it into our lives and stay sensitive while we see everything around us. We can't close our eyes while we walk down the street, but we can, you know, we need to keep them open, and we can still connect to our physical sensations.
We can't keep our eyes closed while we walk down the street, but I think most of us tend to walk down the street kind of disengaged or not looking at other people, maybe looking down or with headphones or looking anywhere but in other people's eyes. And I felt like it kind of challenged me, the movement, to move and look at other people, while some of the movements that I'm doing maybe felt strange, and I kind of had to take a moment and it brought this self-awareness. Like, do I look weird while I'm doing this? Like, do other people see me doing something strange? And then liberating, because then I was like, who cares? We're all moving in this great new way.
Yeah. I think it's great that you had that experience of it. And I think it's quite typical also that, you know, unlike a lot of other movement practices, you know, where you're really trying to have a very precise form, you're maybe moving through, let's say, sun salutations in yoga, or in a ballet class, you're moving through a very particular vocabulary, and you're trying to achieve, you know, a certain look. And here it's not about achieving that certain look. And it's about also finding things that are unknown and unfamiliar for your body, that these are also movement options. And you don't need to look a certain way. You don't need to move in a particular form. We work without mirrors in Gaga, and that's also part of it. So, we're looking around at each other, but it's not to judge, it's to get inspired by, and we don't look at ourselves. We can sense ourselves, and we want to sense ourselves, but we don't look in the mirror to say, okay, now I'm achieving this form, right. Maybe, whatever it may be. It's really about, okay, how do I sense the distance of my body parts in the space from one another? And maybe there's some place that I'm not normally. Maybe they're behind me now. What does that bring my body? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel it could be really empowering for people, because often I think in Western society, and speaking as a yoga teacher and dance teacher here, most people will come into a space, whether that's an adult or a child, and say, well, what do you want me to do? Well, how do you want this to look? How do I know that I'm doing this right? And instead I believe Gaga takes that away and gives the power back to the person. Like, it doesn't have to look a certain way. Kind of look inside and see how you want this to feel in your body, or how it feels in your body, or how your body wants to move.
Yeah, I think there is something to that, in that, also we often talk about Gaga. If we use movement language is one word we use a lot, or one term we use a lot, and research is another term that we use a lot. And so much of it is about really, discovering the how it feels. So again, not how it looks, but really looking for it for yourself. So your experience may be a bit different in your body than my experience, and the person next to us, and the person across the room. And it's quite right that we don't necessarily need to look a certain way. I think for those of us who are teaching, there are times that we will guide and we'll try to give feedback, because maybe we can perceive that the physical experience someone is having is not quite what we think they can get to, like that they have more to research, they have more to discover. But it's less about, again, achieving a particular form, which is also something that's wonderful in a lot of practices, but it's a bit different than what we're aiming for.
Right.
Yeah.
And what do you think makes it so accessible for all these different people? Because you did say it was for dancers and non-dancers, but I've also seen on Netflix's Move, which highlighted Gaga movement in nursing homes. And I thought that was fantastic, because we never consider that, at least I've never heard of the elderly being given like a movement class, where they could really explore their bodies.
Yeah, I mean, as we noted, so there is the Gaga for dancers, but really all from the beginning, it was already something that was geared towards the general public as well. Ohad's research, he did it in tandem. He was working with the company, with Batsheva, and he was also working with a group of people who had no dance background whatsoever, who were interested in moving, who were interested in connecting to their bodies in a different way. And so already back in the late 1990s and the 2000s, when he was really deepening into the research, it started out with that. And since then, there's been, I think, more of an attempt. First off, the regular classes, they could be for anyone of any age. So a Gaga people class, which is what we call the classes for the general public, not specifically for dancers. You can have someone in there who's 16, someone who's 36, 56, 66, maybe even an 86-year-old might pop in there. Yes, or well, 8-year-olds maybe not so much. We typically do start at around 16, but there is also there's some Gaga for families where, you would have your 8-year-old and you and maybe somebody else dancing together. But so it's always been for a broad age range and different body types, different physical abilities. You have somebody who maybe they are a dancer, or maybe they're not a dancer, but they're a yoga practitioner like you, or they do Pilates, or maybe they swim, they run, and maybe there's someone who really they don't do that in their daily life, and this is their workout. This is their form of tuning into their body. So we've always had that within this one class, that it can encompass everybody. But we have also, done these classes that are for particular populations. So like you said, in old age homes, we have some in retirement homes. We have now also a seated class in general, which that in and of itself is a fairly large umbrella. And we want people who maybe they're older and they're unsteady, and so they don't feel quite so comfortable standing for a long period of time, and they do it in their chair. Maybe there's someone who's younger, but they just sprained their ankle and they can't stand for a long period of time, so they can rehabilitate and move in their chair. Maybe there's somebody who's in a wheelchair who can participate, and maybe it's just somebody who it fits into their schedule. So it can really be for everybody in that way. Yeah, and we do want to reach people. Yeah.
I believe it was maybe just last week, and correct me if this is the wrong publication, but I believe it was in the Jerusalem Post that they were highlighting Gaga for its ability to allow differently abled people to step into a dance class, that otherwise dance classes can be kind of a scary place for a person that moves differently or has some limitations to movement in terms of dance. And I thought that was really great because, yeah, how do you access more of the population? So when you say Gaga is for everybody, it really is for everyone. And I've taken both the Gaga for dancers and Gaga for people. And I don't know, maybe it's because I was a dancer that I didn't see a whole lot of difference. I didn't think that like maybe a person off the street couldn't do the dancer class. Maybe just the vocabulary was different, at least online, because I haven't had the great blessing of being in an in-person class. But would that be true to say that it kind of gives everyone a greater opportunity to explore their bodies in a different way?
Yeah, I think it gives both dancers who have, you know, whether they have a ballet background, a flamenco background, a hip hop background, whatever they have, it gives them a different way to explore their bodies. And people without dance backgrounds, it also is giving them this kind of a very similar opportunity to explore. And I think you're perceptive in that we do view this Gaga dancer track and the Gaga people track as having more in common than separate. The dancers classes, they are more geared for people who have this ambition to perform on stage. We are drawing on the vocabulary, typically of ballet specifically, because for a lot, not everybody, but for a lot of trained dancers, that is kind of a common ground that they can reference, their skills that they will need to use in their daily lives. And that becomes kind of a framework on which you can build the Gaga research. And there are some things that we do there, like jumping, that we don't do so much in people classes. But in both of these settings, it really is about exploring your sensations, pushing the limits a little bit, finding something a bit different than what you're used to, and also really enjoying, which I think is something that we all need more of in our lives, and especially in this time. So it's
it was kind of like a party. I felt like when I took it, it was kind of like an international party. I'm like, this is great. We're gonna dance together. And especially during the pandemic, it not only allowed connection within my own family, but I felt like we're connecting with the people dancing online, which as much time as we now all spend online, I don't think I always get that. But I did feel the sensation like we're really sharing thousands of miles away with each other.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that you feel that, because I feel that too. And I think that's something that we've really aimed for with the live stream classes, that it is really about connecting with people from afar. We were lucky even before the pandemic in that, you know, though it started here in Tel Aviv, we've really spread out globally, and teachers travel. There are teachers who are based in different places. And so there's always been this kind of international community around it. But now, in a sense, this international community can gather online in the same virtual space at the same time. And it really is, you know, you see each other dancing, even if it's in these little boxes, you do. And at the end of class, for the online classes, we're spotlighting people. So you see, even if you can't look around you and see the people in the studio, at the end, you see each other dancing, and maybe you see yourself for a moment. And people they're meeting online, they're connecting with each other. And it's been really this great gift to have a community throughout this whole year and some, as it were.
I've noticed that across social channels, people be like, "Oh, you do Gaga," like they're like congregating around this movement. You know, they identify with it strongly. I think I just posted about it recently, and all these people are like, "Gaga, Gaga, Gaga," like all across the world. Yeah, it's really cool. But you said that it wasn't online before, correct? It was. Is it true to say that, like, during the pandemic, you guys launched online?
Yeah. So things here in Tel Aviv and in Israel at large, they were shutting down around March 15th, and March 16th, I think we were online. We just took a really quick decision, not knowing how long this would be. I don't think at that time any of us thought that this was going to be what it was. But, you know, we thought, okay, this could be a temporary solution and a way to keep going, a way to connect to people, and a way to find something positive in this time. So we went online, and it was a great decision. And it's, I think, you know, especially at the beginning when we were all confined to our homes, I know for myself, I never really had thought about the freedom of movement that we have in our own lives. Just, you know, walking to the grocery store, going to the corner coffee shop, going to the playground or the park, walking to work, going to see a friend. You're just that traveling in and out of your home and in and out of a space. And I think for me, I know that when I got to take class online, even if I was confined to my house, I finally felt, you know, for this half hour online, I have some measure of freedom of movement. You know, it may be bound by this space, but I'm in my body. You know, I'm no longer walking the half an hour or an hour a day that I once was, but okay, now I'm in my body. I'm exploring again. I'm still finding something new, even if I can't leave my home or I can't go, you know, more than 100 meters or 1 kilometer, which those were the regulations here.
Right. It
Yeah,
kind of transports you too. It gives you that freedom to know, like, with this body, I could do so much, maybe more than I really even think about on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, Ohad often, he does talk about going beyond our familiar limits on a daily basis. That's something that he hopes that doing Gaga will help us to do, to physically transcend those places where we think, oh, this is, you know, how strong we are, how flexible, how much we can stretch. But no, maybe we can go more. Maybe we can stretch more. Maybe we can, you know, press more, find more effort, and also in that find more pleasure. And it's true. I know that in my practice, you know, I've been doing this since 2007. That I've definitely found more and more layers, and I've gone beyond what I thought I could do. And, you know, I've gotten older and I feel, oh, you know, my body is changing, but wow, look at all of these things that I can do still, whether in class and then again, to take it into my daily life. Yeah.
That's another part of it, because there's this idea culturally and maybe internationally of, like, beyond a certain age. I know when I was a dancer, I thought, you know, by 25, you were ancient and you were not going to dance anymore. You know, it's one of these ideas, like, no, it's like that your career is done. You might as well sit down. And then now, nearing my 40s, I feel like this is one of those movement practices that makes me feel still vital and able to move in a way that yoga does too, in that body will do great things. And maybe if I had this practice when I was younger, I wouldn't have these beliefs, these limiting beliefs around movement. That maybe the movement is different or changes, but it's not worse than it was. It doesn't grow worse.
Yeah, I really identify with that too. I also had this idea, if I think about, you know, my mindset before I came to Gaga. I came to Gaga when I was 27. And I had a lot of the same ideas as you did. And I'd also been plagued by a lot of injuries. And so I don't think I had envisioned, I didn't know at the time, I didn't envision that at the time I would get to become a Gaga teacher. A teacher at the time, the only teachers were former dancers from Batsheva, and I never was one. You know, I 40 at that time felt way, way far away. And, you know, the idea that I could still be dancing and so active and really enjoying moving and feel super connected to my body. You know, I think as a more naive 20-something-year-old, I just was like, oh, you know, I hope, but I don't know. And now I just turned 40. I feel, yeah, you know, here I am. I'm still doing this. I can still do this for a long time. I see the people in class and I'm so inspired by them. You know, I see them of every age and every walk of life. And I see how connected they are to their bodies. I see how much groove they have, like how much they're enjoying moving and dancing and how much they can do. And it's something I think also, in a lot of contexts, we don't see older people moving. You know, the media doesn't necessarily show us, or it shows it shows a certain idea of age and what you can do in your body at a certain age. And I think that that's not the case. You know, the more that we can stay in tune with our body now, however old we are, you know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, hopefully we can still have that. And we can also have some more wisdom and knowledge if we really tune in to ourselves.
It also dictates, this belief also dictates what is available for people, because I always struggled with, like, once I wasn't a dancer anymore, what do I do? You know, I have to do something else, because there's not necessarily dance classes for older people, you know, or non-dancers everywhere. And the same idea with, like, when we talk about the elderly exercising, the classes that are usually promoted is like, you could do chair yoga or you could do water aerobics. That's like it. You know?
Yes, it's true. Yeah, I had a similar thought. We might have even spoken about this briefly when we first talked. That I thought, you know, well, what happens to dancers if they don't go into a professional dance career and they're done with university? You know, like where do they go? What do they do? And here there's a practice that, you know, for them it's great. And then also, if somebody has never danced and they're 40 or 45 or 50 or however old they are, okay, well, this is perfectly welcoming for them, which is also nice, because there's some people who maybe always harbored a desire to dance, but for whatever reason didn't. And it's nice to have a venue that, again, it's not judgmental. It's not putting you in front of a mirror. It's not trying to get you to conform to a certain mold, as if you were trying to go on stage and be a professional dancer. So
it's non-competitive in that way. You're not competing against others, and you're not competing against yourself. So there's separation there. You don't have to be anything or look a certain way and still enjoy this experience.
Right. Yeah. You just need to be open to grow, to try, to experience, to not take it too seriously. We often talk about, you know, you can be a little bit silly. And if you can do that, then I think there's lots of room to explore and have fun with it.
When you said a little bit silly, my first Gaga class was with this teacher, and it was just hilarious. I keep watching the clip over and over and over again. He's like, okay, now move, but you're covered in honey. Okay, now move, but you're covered in feathers, and you want to get the feathers off. It was so funny watching it back. Obviously, watching it back wasn't like it felt while I was doing it, but it was just hilarious. I love watching that clip over and over. I'm like,
yeah, it's fun to really be in that. I mean, we can enjoy that sensation, and you can tap into that sensation now, right? You can imagine that you're covered in honey, and you can shake the feathers that are falling down and shake them off, or you could move through honey. Yeah, it's fun using these images, and they're a little bit lighter than some kinds of instructions, so they add a little something to it.
Right. And you said you started Gaga at first around 25, you said?
27, I think. Yeah, 27.
But you're not from Tel Aviv.
26. No, I'm not from Tel Aviv.
You're not from Tel Aviv. I want to say you're from New Jersey, correct?
Yes.
So how does a dancer, ex-ballerina, get to Tel Aviv and discover Gaga and then go to Tel Aviv? Or did you go to Tel Aviv and then discover Gaga?
It's sort of both and, because I never got to take it in the States. At that time in 2007, there really wasn't any chance to do Gaga in the States. So I'd heard of it. So I'd like discovered it sort of by word of mouth without trying it. What happened was I was really intrigued. At the time, I was doing a lot of dance history work. I had done a Master of Fine Arts at Ohio State. And I was really, really intrigued by Batsheva Dance Company, by Ohad Naharin's choreography, which I had the opportunity to see. And there was just a lot of buzz about the dance scene in Israel in general. A lot of really great choreographers who were making work, who were touring. And so I wanted to learn more about all of these things. And I was lucky enough to get a Fulbright grant to come to Israel for the 2007 to 2008 academic year. So I made it over here. And then I really discovered Gaga, because I could finally get into the studio and take classes. So that's how I made it over here. And I just
prior to actually making it to Israel, were you just kind of hearing about Gaga, or you had watched it online, or, you know, there was some dancer talk around the subject?
There was dancer talk around the subject. I mean, it's funny to actually put myself in the mindset of how things were then. You know, forget Gaga online, forget actually getting to Zoom and do classes or Crowdcast or any of this technology. You know, for that matter, I think YouTube was still pretty much in its infancy when I was applying to the Fulbright, and so maybe I had gotten to see a few clips of Ohad's choreography, and I had seen the Batsheva Dance Company perform a few times, both on tour in the States, and then there was one time that I had come to Israel and I saw them a little bit. And yeah, just within dancer circles, the name Gaga was already out there. And I think there were teachers in the company who would teach when they were on tour, although I never got to experience that. So Gaga didn't even have a website. There were no videos of anything online. There were like a few articles.
So it's kind of underground. It was something that the dancers would teach maybe if they were in a city and had just done a show, something like that, or like workshops at the theater.
Yeah, I think it was exactly that. And to be honest, I think at that time, there were already Gaga people classes open to everyone here in Israel. But I think abroad, I think what the company dancers probably did more often than not, it was probably classes for dancers. So I'm not sure even how easy, you know, if I was not in the dance world, like, you know, would I have heard of it at all? Would it have been an option at all outside of Israel? Probably not. Yeah, but here it was already really taking root and blossoming, and was very, very much for the general public. So then I came here, and that's what I took.
So you're in your mid-20s, you arrive in Israel, you're studying, right, for your MFA?
So I'd finished the MFA, and I was just an independent dance researcher, which was such a dream to have a year to just research. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. So what were you researching? Israeli dance companies, or?
Yeah, it was a lot, and it all changed when I got here. You know, you get on the ground, you see what's happening, and things shift. I was interested in how the Israeli dance scene, it had started out actually being very influenced by Americans, by Martha Graham, if that's the name that you or some other people watching or listening know. But by the time I got here, Ohad Naharin was a very well-known name internationally within the dance community. And again, all of these other choreographers, Yasmin Goder and Inbal Pinto and Avshalom Pollock and Rami Bear, a lot of people. So I was kind of interested in that shift. I was interested in how Israeli choreographers were expressing their culture. Like, were they relating very evidently and explicitly to current events here, to elements of Israeli identity, Israeli culture, Jewish identity. These were all things I'd explored there. And then that kind of all happened there. It was I ended up doing just a lot of mapping things out. And then Gaga really became a very key sort of physical element in my life during that year, because that was something that was made here. And so, you know, how does this choreographer, Ohad Naharin, who had trained and been sort of plucked from Batsheva by Martha Graham, he'd gone to New York, he'd danced with her, he'd had this performing career. How does he come back here? How does he become the artistic director of this company and just revolutionize dance training, not only here in Israel, but abroad? And how does he also create this practice, which is not just about revolutionizing dance training, but giving something to people regardless of, you know, whether they're dancers, whether they want to go on stage.
Because from what I've read, he wanted to create a way to speak to his dancers that got them to move in a way that he wanted them to move before learning the choreography. Is that fair to say?
It's a lot about, you know, whether or not they know the choreography already, but how do they interpret the work? And how could he communicate to the dancers in a way that it would really improve their interpretation? So he developed this vocabulary, and we haven't gotten so much into, you know, what is the vocabulary? Maybe it's been a little theoretical, but, you know, how do we deal with the qualities of movement? How do we have something that's like a bit thicker, and how do we have movement that's a bit softer? You know, how do we have gradations? A lot of Gaga is about range, that you can move kind of with these very small details. You can move much larger. You can move very slow. You can move very fast. And there's these spectrums with everything in between. You can be very thick. You can be just a bit thick, 70%, 60%. You can almost measure these things. How could he talk to his dancers about being explosive? This kind of like very fast power that can come out, this force. And a lot of the terminology in Gaga, if we go back to the idea that it's a movement language, so if he then brings us into the rehearsal studio, whether he's creating a work with the dancers or whether it's an existing choreographic work that he's resetting and reviving, how can this kind of language help the dancers do the movement in the way that it really is kind of in line with his intention, but they can also maybe bring something of themselves to it. Because
it's really genius, because there's a difficulty in what is created in your mind and then the ability to get it across, because language, whatever language you're speaking, is so limited in a lot of ways, especially when we're trying to express art. So that's amazing to be able to like tell a dancer like explode at 70%. They know what you're talking about,
Yeah, I mean, it might take a little bit of fine tuning, but you're like, there are these tools, and when you pair them together, you can become much more precise. When a dancer is training in this class every day and they have this shared language with the choreographer, then they can really, I think, find this synergy in the studio where it can just, the sky is the limit at that point.
Right. And I think if I could compare Batsheva Dance Company's performances to art, I would say, like a piece of painted art, I would say sometimes there's a story, sometimes there's not a story, and sometimes it's just a feeling you get, and the feeling, or at least I know the feeling, but I can't express what that feeling is necessarily, because I feel like I'm doing a disservice to what I'm actually experiencing.
That's beautiful. And I think there is something to that. There's a range in what the company has presented. There's certainly a large range in Ohad Naharin's repertory, and that there are works where there is much more of a story, like Yag. I don't know if you got to see Yag during the pandemic. It was something that Batsheva did. They put it out on screen. There are other works that are much more abstract, and there's a lot of room, I think, also for audience members to interpret. But it sometimes it can be challenging to put into words, and I think that's also, maybe we don't always need to put into words, but maybe that's also touching on, Ohad recently has been talking about sort of this invisible chaos in the body, and chaos, it's not necessarily a matter, and in fact, it's not really like a mess, but it's something that it's hard to describe. Right. And so like the language, like maybe you can't find quite the words to describe that, but you can still be very aware of it. There is still some order and organization going on with that. And the same in the work of art, right? That maybe we don't have the ability to easily translate our reaction or what we see into words. But it has kind of its own structure.
Right.
It has its own logic. It is coherent in some way. And it can generate a lot of sensations or feelings.
Or even like thinking like, oh, I can't express what this is or what this means to me, but my body understands this. Some part of my mind understands this, or on some emotional level, like this makes sense to me. And maybe it's that chaos. Maybe it's that there is chaos in the body and we're seeing it played out in front of us in a way that our bodies can see themselves in it.
Yeah. You also said that your body understands it, right? And I think you're also talking about this kinesthetic response that you have, right? That you have a physical response. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about dance, is that we can sometimes have this physical reaction. And I think in general, we're often, at least in the society I grew up in, in New Jersey, like I don't think we were really trained or taught, educated, like how do we talk about these kinds of things and how do we talk about dance? almost of all the arts. I feel like we sort of put that aside, which is kind of funny because we all have bodies, and we all, I think we all engage in dance and in movement, right? And perhaps movement can also just be viewed as a kind of dance.
But I think when we uplift the brain, right, we give the brain so much power in our culture that there's a lot of people completely disconnected to their body. They say things like, I don't feel well. And you're like, oh, what do you feel? And they're like, I don't know. So there is this like disconnect.
There totally is. And it's, I mean, this is one of the things that I feel it's been fascinating for me about Gaga, in that there is this disconnect in a lot of kind of our modern lives and a lot of Western societies. And here, you know, we're talking about all the time tuning into the sensation. Like if you move a little bit, you can sense the touch of your skin and your clothing, and you can feel the air on your skin, and that already brings this awareness. And then how do we not only have these sensations, but how do we also transform that into pleasure, right? That it's something that we can really enjoy from it, and you know, be kind of constantly aware of this. And we don't necessarily talk about emotions in Gaga. Like we don't say, be happy now while you're dancing. Like let's dance and be happy. That's not the kind of instructions we give. But if I'm dancing and I'm, you know, connecting to the sensations on my skin, and I'm really starting to find the pleasure in it, then it also is sparking some joy in me. So it transforms and kind of mutates into something which also affects my mood. And you realize the more that you engage in this, how our bodies are so connected to also our mental states, to our emotional states. Even though we do have, okay, you know, here's the brain and here's this, and you know, our head is also a body part, right? We can move it. We don't just need to think about the movement, but what happens if we actually treat it as the same as, you know, our arm, or the same as our leg, that we can move our head and I can feel the sensation of the air on my face, you know, on my cheeks, on my forehead, and I can enjoy from that.
You hit two very important things for me. And it's this idea of what we find desirable and what we find pleasurable. And I don't think we ask ourselves or each other that question enough. It's certainly not something I see often. I think that leads to the disconnect of many people not really knowing what they feel pleasure about. What do they desire? And maybe the body is one way to start to ask that question of yourself. You know, start with the biggest part of you, your body, and then see what you find.
Yeah. Can you expand on the like what is desirable part? Because that's interesting. Like let me just hear you talk about that.
So there's a lot of people that I've spoken to, whether it's in my yoga practice or my former dance practice or just out in the world, when you ask them to consider what they enjoy, what they find pleasurable, they sometimes have a hard time answering that. And I'm thinking maybe with practices like Gaga or yoga, we're taking the largest part of ourselves, what's most physical, what we could really touch and feel, our bodies, and start to explore those questions of, oh, maybe when I move like this feels good. And even that initial thought of this feels good is not a thought I think most people have during their day-to-day life.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think, you know, even for me, and I don't know, maybe you also feel this, certainly like when I'm in the studio or when I'm doing Gaga, I am all the time kind of aware of that. And it's very easy if I am spending hours in front of my computer typing away or doing whatever physical tasks I'm doing, you know, unpacking the groceries, cooking dinner, lifting my daughter. I'm not, sometimes if something's really wrong, I'm probably noting, oh, that doesn't feel good. But I'm not always able to have that awareness of, oh, this feels good, or maybe this would feel better if I do this. I think we do turn that off. And I think you're right that, you know, just oftentimes by virtue of engaging in some kind of physical practice, whether it's yoga or Gaga or another class or practice, maybe even running, like hopefully you are tuning into that, and then being able to sometimes take that into things which are less explicitly, oh, this is a physical activity now, or a time to check in about it. Like maybe you can check in with yourself about it when you are walking down the street or unloading those groceries.
Or something as simple as being on your computer. You could sit on your computer and be in a posture that feels good for you, or you could be on your computer and kind of be all hunched over and be in a posture that's just killing you by the second.
Yeah, totally guilty of that sometimes. And then, right. But then, can we bring some tools from whatever our practice is into that? So like, I know for myself, I do sometimes end up slouching and hunching and getting lower. And then, can I maybe move a little bit? Can I shift my weight? Can I find a little bit of a dance in these small details? And then all of a sudden it changes this just physical state and situation that I'm not so aware of, but that's maybe even causing damage, into something that can, lift my body and lift my mood and my whole being.
And I think practices like this also change how we move through the world. I always talk about, when I first started doing yoga, I have the tendency, maybe a lot of ballet taught me to do this on my time off. So it means that I'm not walking through the world with my heart out, right? And something as simple as like walking with your heart first, as children often do, makes you feel different in the world. It changes your experience of the world around you. So can you speak to, when you first discovered Gaga, how did it change the rest of your life? Were you moving differently through the world in any way? Or did it like kind of sneak up on you after?
I'm sure it did change. I mean, I guess I can also say, I guess, the first thing is it kind of changed my relationship first to myself within dance, and then probably outside. But for sure, with regards to dance, it's because I really had been so grounded in Western dance techniques that were very form-based, that were very much about trying to find a very particular shape, form, step. And I didn't even really have much improvisational training. And so the idea that, I remember seeing, so like really my first glimpse of Gaga was from outside the studio. And Gaga is not usually something that we're supposed to watch, but I saw it happening in the studio, and I just saw this brief moment, and people looked so free, and they were doing these things. And I remember thinking to myself, can I do that? Like I felt so locked in my movement patterns and these ideals of what I'm supposed to do and what I'm supposed to look like. So I guess the first change was that I finally kind of gathered up the courage to go into class, to take that risk, which it's sort of funny, but I felt that. And then I just felt, okay, wow, I don't need to always look in a certain way, and I can just really tune into my body and explore. And I think with regards to then how did I move through the world when I wasn't in the studio, I think there were just, a variety of things. I think some of it is, looking for sensation and really trying to be aware of it, and that oftentimes I can be. Sometimes it's a matter of just feeling like there are tools that I'm taking from Gaga into my life. Like we talk about connecting to a sense of plenty of time, and often I still have this kind of like East Coast fast walking thing, right? So can I with that? Can I like let go a little bit? Can I still go fast but not feel like I'm rushing? And can I connect to a sense of plenty of time? And then often my body will feel much better, because sometimes I'm like rushing down the street and it doesn't feel so great. It's just like it's little things, but a lot of them, they accumulate. And I think I just feel freer in my movement in general, and more enjoyment. Like we talk about this, the pleasure of movement and the passion to move, and it was always there. It was always there, but it wasn't spoken about explicitly in my training, and I didn't necessarily think about it explicitly in my life, whether in a dance context or a non-dance context. And now it's like, this is my default. This is my default of how I am. I love having a body and moving my body. And it's just nice to embrace that.
Yeah, it's a sense of
Powerful.
abundance, and joy. Like, I want to do this because it's joyful instead of like, I want to do this because I want to get better at X, Y, and Z. I want to do this because I want to achieve this. We're always forward thinking, or I want to do this because I'm punishing my body in some way because I want to be thinner, because I want to be faster, because I want to be more limber. It's a different attitude to take. It's sometimes how I felt when I started to run. I hated it, but I loved to see other people run and how free they looked and seemed like they felt. And I was like, I want that. Like, can I make it feel like that looks, And eventually it did. I was never running like, oh, I'm going to be the fastest, or, oh, I'm going to lose so much weight, or the number of things you convince yourself of. I was like, no, I want this to be freeing and liberating. I want to move in a way that I feel free, at least for this part of the day. And I think I feel the same way in Gaga, because even in yoga, if you're taking a class, there's very specific positions for everything. I think that's the way it's built. There's a pose, and there's a drishti, or focal point, and there's a breath. So there is right and wrong. There's no gray area in that. And Gaga is liberating in that. I'm like, I'm just doing this for joy. Whatever I do is correct, and whatever I'm doing is to what my body needs. And that I don't think we get often enough in our lives.
Yeah. It's giving you some license to do that, and to spend this time with your body in that way.
And I've had some dancers reach out to me and say, when I first started doing Gaga, because of course I was calling everybody, and I was like, have you heard about Gaga? Have you done this? And everybody's like, of course. Well, the dancers, of course. But then I started receiving messages like, oh, it healed me. Oh, I was going through this really emotional challenge, depression, a breakup, injury, and it healed me. Can you speak to that? Why did you get those responses or that feedback from your students as well?
Yeah, I definitely hear that from participants all the time, and sometimes it's overwhelming in a beautiful way to hear that, just to realize the impact that this has, whether it's on their bodies, whether it's a physical injury, or whether it's something that's going on in their life and it has helped them cope with it. And I think that there is kind of an aspect of Gaga that is very healing, and is even, it's been there again from the beginning. So again, if I look at the genesis of Gaga, which it's still evolving even today, it's not also locked into kind of one thing, right? But Ohad himself had dealt with a lot of injuries, and this was also a way of really being in tune with his body and being able to heal from it. So that was there, kind of alongside that idea of communicating with the dancers, and I think because there's sort of that element as a foundation, we don't want to work with pain. We're quite explicit about that. So we do also always allow people on a physical level, if there is something that it's too much, it's too intense, too fast, too strong, we welcome them to always turn down the volume. So you can still have things that are really meaningful physically at a low volume. And by doing that, you're creating, I think, a lot of flow in your body. And I think that there's healing potential in that, and having movement. I think it used to be that people would say, like, you're injured, okay, don't move it. And I think that the research is starting to say, no, maybe there does need to be some movement in a gentle way. So, that's happening on a physical level. And then I think, I feel that with Gaga, because we're not divorcing, the body from the mind, because we're not working with pain, but we are looking for this physical pleasure, all of this is helping us to cope with things, to tune into sort of the better, like the better or the ideal, not in terms of how do we look, but how do we feel? How do we sense? Like, can we get to our best and maybe go beyond what we think we can in terms of that? And that helps us.
Right.
I guess one other thing I'll throw out there is that Ohad also often talks about how Gaga is a lot about strengthening our engines. And that's, in a sense, very much physical, right? That we can sort of metaphorically talk about, although quite concretely also about sort of engines in our body, right? That we can use these, we can turn these on. We can use many engines. We could try to like lift something. We can bench press this from here. Or like, what if we're using more and more of our body to do that same action, and we spread out the effort and we get stronger? And I think then metaphorically, we can apply that to life, right? Like we want to get stronger to deal with the things in our life. And some of that's physical, but some of that's just how do we find, again, more of the pleasure, more of the joy, more of the openness, more of the research. So it's not just about ambition. It's not just about achieving. It's not just about, this or that, but there's a lot more, and that can help us cope. So whether it's a physical issue or then, maybe something happening emotionally, we maybe have more tools from this.
I think even on an emotional level, it helps us be very present, because that idea of there's always time is something that when you're in a state of stress or trauma, you're thinking there is not enough time, and we're either projecting out so far into the future of somewhere we want to be, like not in this feeling, or somewhere in the past. But rarely do we get the opportunity of being right in the moment and just feeling what we're feeling, and the freedom of just moving through that feeling, whatever it is, without trying to change it or manipulate it in any way.
Absolutely. How can you recognize, how can you give space to this moment, be fully in it, and just recognize it. And then sometimes maybe you do want to make a change, but first you need to have that being in the moment and that recognition of it in order to, either stay that way or change, or
And to accept yourself. I think accept yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, exactly where you are, instead of already taking out the checklist and being like, oh, well, I'd be better if I changed this, this, and this. I'd be fine. So I just think it's brilliant. But before we go, because I want everyone to do Gaga now, that's my thing. How can folks all around the world join You Teachers online?
Oh, that would be wonderful. So everybody is welcome to join us. We have classes 7 days a week, multiple times throughout the day. They're live streamed. And you can go to gagapeople.com/en. That's the English side, but you'll easily find the way to toggle over to the English side, even if you just go to gagapeople.com. And there's a nice button there for the ongoing online classes. And you can join us. We have those. We also have occasional workshops. Sometimes Ohad Naharin is teaching those as well. And they're open for people. There are ones specifically for dancers, but a lot of them are really for the general public. So I encourage and welcome everybody who's interested to try.
For sure. How are the workshops different from the individual live classes?
So the workshops for people, typically they pair a Gaga People class with a methodics class. And methodics, it's a more flexible format. It's longer than the online class. Usually the online people classes are in half an hour. And the methodics, it goes on for about an hour, maybe even a bit more. And it's a way to kind of research more. Sometimes some of the fundamental things might be broken down. We might approach a certain subject from a few different ways. We don't need to have the same kind of peaks that we might have in class. So, but it's a little bit different every time. And then the workshops, usually there's a little bit of a session at the end where people, like you said, it's kind of like a party at the end. So it's really a party at the end. And, people dance, we'll have like a sort of curated set list of music, and people will dance and maybe get a little bit of input. And it's just a chance to check everything and have fun with it.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm still crossing my fingers and putting it out into the universe that you all are going to make it out into Miami so I could take a class in person. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm going to have to jump on a plane after this pandemic.
I hope you can. I hope you can come to us, but I hope we can also come to you. Yeah.
Either way. Yeah. Well, I thank you so much, Deborah, for being here with us. I know whoever was listening got so much out of this, and I really do hope they check you guys out. So thank you.
Thank you, too. It's been wonderful talking with you.
I hope to talk to you really soon.
I hope so, too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Wild Wonder podcast. This podcast is made possible by our generous Patreon patrons. If you want to support us, please go to patreon.com/wildwonder. Thanks so much for listening. See you very soon.